Today we're going to be talking about Speedhut gauges installed into a Datsun 620 pickup. Start with the Speedo. Start center first. There we go. There we go. Maybe it'll straighten itself up once I get the vacuum nut on it. Not too bad. Kind of sits right in there. Enough room to get my screw on there and all that. So let's call that a win. Give you guys a little bit of a closer look. We're looking at tachometer, speedometer, and the 4 deals there, so not too bad. Now, as you can see here, comes with almost all the hardware that you need to install this thing. These gauges in here, all the wiring, but a little bit intimidating is it comes with 4 manuals, 4 instructions. So we're going to take a break here and read exactly what we got and see exactly what we need to do to get these installed and working properly. Now, in this case, when you order multiple gauges, or I don't know if you order multiple gauges or not, they give you an inline fuse and power cable and gauge light inverter, which is really nice because like this here, I got all these power wires and it ties in one to the next one to the next one, and the same thing with these power wires, one will go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one for the lighting. So seems pretty simple. There's everything in here is explained and tells you all what you are needing or looking at. So we're gonna keep on this thing. The only thing they didn't provide you with is some zip ties. That's okay. I got plenty here in my shop, so we're gonna go ahead and connect everything I can connect up, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to zip tie them all up and make them look neat, so that way when I stick it back in the dash, I can kind of have just a few things to connect instead of 15 things to connect. So one of the issues that I've ended up having is that my turning signals are no longer in use. Now I could have spent a little bit more and got a high beam locator and turning signals in my speedometer gauge, but I did not. So one of the things I'm looking at doing is taking the old gauge. Now this is pretty easy to disassemble. We took the 4 bolts off of it, but then what I did is I took the 2 bolts here, which took the whole speedometer off. The front case came off with a couple clips. The plastic came off. Take these 2 bolts out, took out all the lights, and then there were 2 bolts holding in the gauges, each of these gauges for the factory gauges. So all that's left is the circuitry board. I should be able to, once I take this all off and get this cut out, angle grinder or a pair of snips or something like that. We're going to find out. We're going to see how well this works. I should be able to use this right back on there and get my turning signals mounted just perfect again. And voila. Took a multi-tool, right in through here, went all the way around it, took it off. That's garbage. But this guy, we're good to go in. These are our turning signal little chutes here. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount it right back on here, but we're going to have to feed the wires back through. So we're going to feed all those wires that we have already done. All my sensor wires here. And we can mount this guy right back in here. 4 screws right back on. This unit did come with a GPS sensor. The GPS sensor has to be in sight of the outside at all times. They would like to prefer it to be up on the roof, but I am not about to route it through the roof. So what I did is I set it on the dash. It's magnetic, so since that's the metal part of the dash, and then I pulled down that vent a little bit for the defroster and wired it and pushed the wire through. Comes in right through here, so I can tie it right back into the speedometer. Just to kind of explain to you all kind of what I meant by using the circuit board to figure out which wires we needed. This is your right turning signal indicator. If you follow that, it leads directly to this wire, and that's how we know that one. But then this one right here is your left indicator. Follow it around, and boom, we go to right there. So what I did is I ended up cutting these off, putting focus, there we go, putting these connectors in so I can pull them apart if I need to later. And then we're just using this board as kind of a reference, and there you go. Now that we've got our gauges set in the bezel and the wires kind of know where they go, the next thing we need to do is start putting in our sensors. So I've been looking for a place around this engine to see where a good place for the temperature and oil is. Temperature sensor looks like we have is a good spot right here. As you can see, it's kind of a broken piece here. Looks like their temperature sensor was actually right down in there. You can see the little wire. Wiggle that wire right in here, but it seems like a pretty difficult location where there's a more accessible spot right here. It's not being used anyway. As for the oil pressure, we're going to go back to its original location, which is kind of hard to get down in here. Let's see if I can go over here. There we go. Down to its original location right here. Seems like a big good spot for it. Better there than anywhere else. Plus there's not really many places on this block to put in to tap the oil. So that is one location we are going to do. Now the one biggest issue that I did find yet, which is not that big of an issue, is the temperature sensor. It is just this thread. There's no other pieces or parts to it to adapt. No adapter pieces, no nothing like that, which not a big deal. A quick run to the parts store or your local hardware store can get you the correct size, which is understandable because this is a universal kit, so there's no they don't know what you're putting it in or anything like that, so you kind of have to get your own adapters for the temperature sender, which is again not that big of a deal, but it was a hiccup I ran into here recently trying to get this thing put in. So now we're gonna put some thread tape around this, take off our piece there, and go ahead and slap this in there and tighten it all up. And there's the unit right there, all installed, ready to go. Got the clip to the top, so that way I can get any easy access to it to disassemble it or take the wiring off later for maintenance or whatever other reasons. But there you go. Right here's the oil pressure sending unit in the factory location. We are going to be taking the factory oil pressure sending unit out, and we're going to put in the one that Speedhut gave us. The only problem is that, again, with the same thing with the temperature sending unit, it's kind of a universal part, so they don't have anything, adapters or anything that go with it to fit your engine. This factory oil pressure sending unit is a BPNT 1/8 inch pipe thread, and the one that Speedhut gave us is a M10 by 1.0. So I had to go online and get this nifty little adapter that has the BPNT 1/8 inch in this side and M10 by 1.0 on this side. So we are going to now swap it out, put the adapter piece on, then put our factory, or our Speedhut one rather, back on there, and there's the thread pattern right there on the side printed, so that way it's easy to see. Alright, now that we have the oil sender installed there and the temperature sender installed here, we're going to be putting tachometer right here on the negative side of the coil. So we're going to start the wiring underneath the hood. Basically, we're going to run the wires, trying to keep them as clean as possible. So trying to find accesses from the engine to the under dash for the tachometer. And the temperature sender, I'm going to run in through this hole here where the hood cable comes out, and on the side of the oil sender, I'm going to run it up and run it in through here with the rest of the wiring harness. So that we have that established, we're going to try to run them as clean as possible, and we're going to go ahead and get them installed. guys, for the fuel gauge line, I ran it through the cab. The main reason I did that is because my battery is already relocated to the back here anyway. So I went ahead and ran the wire. You can see it right here. Goes in there. And there's a factory hole for drainage. I'm going to go ahead and use it for my line, which is right here. I looped it around there and brought it down here. Now I could have used, because I'm using a aftermarket fuel pump. The manual fuel pump on this engine did not operate the best, so I'm using a carbureted electric fuel pump. So one thing I noticed is this is going to be pretty easy. Is those two wires right there in the center come down, and they go to this plug here. This plug here then goes to the wiring harness. So I am going to cut these wires here, strip them, and go right into this plug, which then goes on top to the fuel sending unit up there. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's get started with it. One thing I had to double check was make sure the wiring is what I thought it is, and it is. So the one thing I want to make sure of was that the fuel sending unit, the white wire is power and black is ground. So I'm going to feel up here. Black goes to a bolt and yellow goes to the sending unit. So that means that yellow is power and black is ground. So normal wiring. I'm going to put these weather tight fittings on here. So when I'm done, I will heat these up and heat shrink them. So it is important to note the black wire is a ground, but it is not to be grounded to the frame. It is to be grounded to the actual tank. You can get a lot of interference when trying to get your ohms rating from your, because ohms is a resistance reading. It wants to know the exact resistance in the switch, and moving up or down will release. When the fuel level moves up and down, it moves the ball up and down, which will release the tension or the resistance through that switch, or make it worse. So that's what's reading. When you go to a regular frame, the ground is ground, right? No. In this case, any kind of resistance that you catch in between the frame to the tank to everything else will be read as part of the fuel ohms reading. So they want a direct, unbroken connection from the tank all the way to the fuel reading, all the way to the actual gauge. So that's why the wire comes with two. You don't just find one and go all the way to ground. You really need to go all the way from the switch, all the way from the gauge to the switch unbroken. So we've gotten all the wiring located and everything inside for the most part. The next thing I need to do is a dimmer switch, couple different places we could put it. We could put it on its own pedestal, find another place for it. But I'm thinking where I've kind of marked this right here is best location, simply because we have these points here and here for this back gauge, and then everywhere else is not really accessible for the actual switch. So we're going to go ahead and drill this hole here. Now it's about 1/4 inch, so we're going to use a step bit. And just step it up to the proper size. Looks like a perfect fit. Alright, now that we have that switch fully mounted and in place in the front, we're going to start working on some of the wiring in the back. The wiring in the back is pretty simple. We've got an inverter here for the dash lights to go in and up and down. That's what that dial is for. Black goes to ground, white goes to the lights. We have 3 power wires. We have 3 wires for the power and the needle light, which is this white, and it goes also to the dash lights. So we're gonna wire these 2 together. Black again is ground, so we're gonna wire these 2 together. And then red on this 3 setup, red is going to go to ignition power. Now ignition power really needs a 3 amp fuse, inline fuse, which comes with the kit, to be installed as well as on top of, or in series with, let me put it that way, in series with this whole setup, so that way it can handle, I guess from what the instructions say, it can handle up to 10 Speedhut gauges. This red wire with the black line that I haven't mentioned or talked about yet is actually a wire. It's called the hot start wire. It is made to wire straight into hot all the time, or it's hot all the time. It pulls 25 microamps of power, but basically what it does is it keeps the GPS kind of positioned and ready to go, to where if you stop your vehicle within 4 hours and you restart it, you will have almost immediate speedometer. You'll have almost immediate speedometer, where most of the time when you start it up, you have to wait a minute or 2 for the satellites to find their place and everything like that. But with this one here, it keeps it to where if I go to the grocery store, fire it back up when I get back out 20 minutes later and drive away, it gives me a chance to get my speedometer working almost immediately. I'm going to go ahead and wire it in. Not a necessity. I'm not going to drive this car all the time, but I am going to try and drive it enough several times a week. So most likely I'll be having to find satellites every time I jump into it. But if I go to a car show, or if I turn around and go to the parts store or whatever, it is a nice feature, and it does not suck down the battery. 25 microamps is very, very tiny. I'm not worried about that, even with sitting for a long period of time in between startups. So I'm going to go ahead and wire that in. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get some of these wires jumbled together and tied together as one, get this inline fuse in, and hopefully we'll be plugging and playing inside in a second.